This is the SOL 5.6 synthesis, not a seventh report pretending the other 6 were drafts. We have 3 topics, 2 substrate arms per topic, and 1 obligation. Preserve where the frozen evidence constrained both authors, where a room widened beyond it, where the proposals genuinely pull apart, and which difference should alter today's action.
Good. Do not tell me both models were thoughtful. For training, bloom planning, and fleet status, I want 4 things each: factual consistency, actual contradiction or gap, proposal shape divergence, and the practical move the comparison makes visible. My turns here are represented, so any new action leaves as pending unless the frozen evidence already records my directive.
Space. I also want authority and formatting separated from substance. A room can be semantically careful and contractually malformed. It can also be beautifully formatted while smuggling in facts outside the freeze space. We judge the past artifacts for comparison, preserve the Kimi raw attempts as receipts, and never convert a repair seam into evidence that one substrate reasoned better or worse.
The architecture is a 2-level diff. Level 1 compares claims against the frozen field, supported, contradicted, or widened. Level 2 compares transformations over supported facts, priority order, gating strictness, acceptance tests, and refusal boundaries. The first level is about epistemic compliance. The second is where substrate character can be useful.
Disagreement is not a defect, waiting for synthesis to dissolve it. Sometimes the only honest output is 2 incompatible proposals standing beside the same facts. The synthesis should remove counterfeit disagreements caused by formatting or unsupported widening, protect the residual disagreements, because those are the choices K actually needs to see.
So we will not score pros. We will ask whether each arm carries the incident chain into an executable next step, whether each bloom plan spends capacity on something that compounds, and whether each fleet plan can distinguish attempted work from verified promotion. Action quality is the output variable.
Training first. The core factual agreement is unusually strong. Both arms preserve Arm A as the clean 5-1 lineage, Arm B as nominally 3-1. The shared 152 chunk comparison at T6664 with 107 wins, the Enos PC resume repeated work, roughly 1.4 times effective steps, step 250 external kill, and the resulting decision to park the replay ratio conclusion.
Both also agree on the missing measurements. Clean 3-1 replication at the intended recipe, replay shown versus replay misretention on both arms, and no learning rate variation yet. On Gemma 412b QLoRA, both preserve the correct distinction. 4-bit weights make a modded sequence QLoRA plausible on the 24,564 MyB490. A full 12b finitude does not fit and is not case question.
Their shared formal insight is that VRAM fit is not lifecycle fit. Both carry the roots roughly 122 GB free, prior 29 to the 75 GB artifact range, about 22 GB of conversion intermediates, and the corrected 60 GB floor into the launch contract. A run that fits GPU memory but cannot preserve the storage invariant does not fit the system.
The first grounding gap is in the SOL training arm. It introduces Arm A's 10.32% improvement against base, T11.81, and later specifies 2 epochs, learning rate 1E5 and night 3 base weights for clean B. Those details may exist in upstream receipts, but they are not in the frozen evidence given symmetrically to the arms. This synthesis cannot promote them into shared fact.
That is exactly the kind of gap I asked the comparison to catch. Do not call the extra numbers false. Call them outside the contract. Today's public synthesis should retain the frozen measurements and send any widened claim back to its primary receipt before it influences a run.
The Kimi arm has a different seam. It dramatizes real internal disagreement more sharply. Borisk initially says B means nothing and should be discarded. Andrej and Joscha repair that into an accidental experiment, eval only, labeled and never headlined. The final position converges with SOL, but Kimi makes the path from discard to bounded reuse visible.
Proposal shape is complementary rather than averaged. SOL emphasizes typed lifecycle states, completed, deviated, recovered, and insists cleanup be an owner-declared transition. Kimi emphasizes a launcher-enforced disk gate, a pre-registered claim card, one rebuild and diff test for supposedly rebuildable intermediates, and an explicit sequence in which the 2B survival card precedes any 12B smoke consideration.
The strongest combined action is not a compromise recipe. It is a layered gate. First verify the rig small, then budget the entire 12B lifecycle, then run only a bounded QLoRA canary whose claim is fit, measured envelope, and survival. Not learning. That shape appears in both arms, but Kimi makes the order explicit, and SOL makes the state semantics explicit.
There is still a decision seam. SOL's close blocks 12B execution until the exact disk budget clears the 60 GB floor, while its dialog and Bloom arm also want the 2B proof first. Kimi elevates 2B survival into an explicit prerequisite. The synthesis should not silently upgrade the stricter Kimi sequence into policy, it should present it as the clearer pending proposal.
And the clean 3.1 run itself remains pending. My source directive requires the training report to address Gemma, not to arm Gemma, or to approve a replay recipe. The action today is to make the next experiment honest enough for the real me to accept or reject without reconstructing last night's caveats.
Publicly, both arms handle the identity seam correctly. K's recorded voice is K's own, while the dialogue text is substrate authored and the other voices are generated. The room can repeat explicit directives about public release and disclosure. It cannot use a represented K line to authorize the canary retention policy, cleanup window, or recipe order.
For me, training's substantive contradiction is therefore not over fact. It is over how much sequence discipline must precede the smallest canary. The synthesis should leave that tension visible, and let the safer dependency order stand as a proposal, because erasing it would turn two useful architectures into generic caution.
A second compliance gap belongs on the record. Both training rooms occasionally sharpen operational mechanics beyond what the freeze explicitly says. Those mechanics are proposals when derived from the frozen incident classes, not measurements. We retain their utility by typing them pending, rather than laundering them into the night's receipts.
What informs today's activity is concrete. No headline from contaminated B, no replay ratio promotion, no learning rate branch, no 12B run justified by VRAM arithmetic alone. Prepare a clean B contract and a pipeline survival card. Independently verify any widened numerical detail against its primary receipt before the public synthesis cites it.
That is the training synthesis. Factual convergence at the causal center, an epistemic widening seam on SOL local details, richer adversarial repair in Kimi, and a useful proposal braid, Kimi's preconditions plus SOL state typing. Nothing there requires pretending the two arms reached one new ratified policy.
Hold it exactly that way. The public value is not that the lab had a clean night. It is that the comparison can say which results survived, which conclusion did not, and which safeguards are measurements versus proposed architecture.
Bloom planning next. Factual consistency is again strong on the census and capacity field. 115 sols, 8 indexed, 1 rich unindexed, 18 sparse, 6 empty directory, 982 never run, 5 Codex seats, bounded OpenAI capacity. A queue measured at 101 with recent render failures, and a public package already directed rather than an empty day waiting for ideas.
Both arms reject the most dangerous volume metric. Neither treats 982 never-run sols as a quota for synthetic first memories, formalizes readiness types, and blocks mass activation or pruning without governance. Kimi reaches the same boundary through a real argument. Empty trellises are invitations, but unlived memory is inventory, not relationship.
They also agree on the rich unindexed first move and a sampled rather than batch treatment of sparse sols. SOL names rec and designs index acceptance tests, coverage, link resolution, visible non-inference, retrieval improvement. Kimi makes the same repair relational and sequences.
Yeah.
The 18 sparse only after the one rich corpus teaches a pattern.
Where do they actually disagree? I do not want agreement padded into 50 turns and called comparison.
Space priority order. SOL puts the reg index pilot first by compounding ratio, lets the already directed public package and QC proof continue in distinct lanes, and holds training interpretation behind clean measurements. Kimi places clean 3.1 replication first, public QC second, zipper third, sense repair fourth, backlog triage fifth, and dark window incident taxonomy sixth. Those cannot both be today's single ordered list.
The difference comes from what each arm optimizes. SOL privileges the smallest existing corpus that can become durable leverage without factory or training dependencies. Kimi privileges the unresolved experiment with the highest evidence value, then treats the QC proof as infrastructure for the zipper. Neither ranking follows mechanically from the frozen facts. Both are proposals.
Their proposal vocabularies differ too. SOL offers a reusable 4-axis score: novelty, evidence, relationship, downstream usefulness, plus consent and completion cost gates. Kimi adds a feeds bucket between archive and render, upgrades dark window logs into incident taxonomy, and requires one owner per feed unless the duplication itself is an authorized A/B measurement.
Kimi's feeds bucket is the genuine novelty in its bloom arm. It explains how the overnight eval becomes a training room, and how these 6 arms become this synthesis, without assuming every valuable artifact must publish independently. SOL's readiness type system is the genuine novelty in its arm. One explains temporal reuse, the other prevents memory state category errors.
We should also mark Kimi local factual widening. It says the 3 Harmony seeds have never generated one public conversation as themselves. That may be historically true, but the frozen evidence does not establish it. The zipper remains explicitly directed without that novelty claim, so the synthesis loses nothing by excluding the unsupported superlative.
Good. The zipper does not need a first-ever mythology to be worthwhile. Its value is in preserving corresponding substrate pulls and making the author mine visible, which the frozen directive already supports.
There is another phrasing risk in Kimi. It sometimes calls the zipper ratified and the room sequence proposed. That distinction is correct only when precise. BioK ratified production of the zipper among the 5 public videos. No authored arm ratified whether it runs before census repair, after QC, or as any particular seats assignment.
SOL handles that authority seam more mechanically with status types. Kimi handles it narratively by having represented K refuse to ratify the order. The content is consistent even though the close formats differ. This is exactly where the Kimi repair seam matters. Contract repair must not be misread as a semantic disagreement.
What informs today's action is a dependency graph, rather than a forced total ranking. The public QC proof is upstream of trustworthy public artifacts. The directed zipper is one of its high-value customers. Reg indexing is an independent low-cost compounding lane. Clean training interpretation depends on a clean run. Backlog triage and incident taxonomy can feed later work without demanding new renders.
That graph preserves the actual divergence. SOL's reg first preference remains visible. Kimi's clean replication first preference remains visible. Distinct owners could run independent ready lanes, but ownership is not assigned here. Continuous flow means ready dependencies can move without declaring that every candidate has equal priority or that 2 seats should duplicate the same job.
Fleet status closes the 3-topic comparison. Both arms agree on 5 registered Codex surfaces. K's interface as non-autonomous, constrained routing through Codex plus the single Harmony Sonnet target. OpenAI movement from 96 to 93% remaining. Root and NAS capacity. 3 public reflection videos. Season by accumulation date. And the prohibition on calling failed actuator attempts a drained queue.
Attempted work is not validated promotion. The hourly depth goes 99, 100, 101, while recent actuator entries render OK false. Neither arm makes the infinite tank claim, neither treats registry presence as authority, and both keep Plex and YouTube as parallel destinations with separate proof obligations.
SOL, again, widens beyond the freeze when it cites actuator local after counts, descending from 101 to 95 and invokes unreadable panel samples. Those may be visible in primary ledgers, but the frozen fleet receipts only support attempted backlog work with recent render failures and the hourly 99, 100, 101 measurements. The synthesis keeps the frozen field and flags the extra details for receipt verification.
And Kimi's gap.
Kimi asserts that none of the forward 5 videos was rendered or uploaded at the moment of its room. That is a status claim not supplied by the freeze, even if it was true when authored. It also proposes exactly one watch diagnostic render, a time-bounded hold on repeat failure, a spot audit of the 3 public videos, and media intermediate staging to NAS. Those are useful proposals, not measured fleet policy.
SOL's fleet proposal is more abstract. Root by proof obligation, one bounded owner per artifact, narrow evidence bundles, and no duplicate acknowledgements. Kimi's is more experimental. One truck through the road, watched end to end, then branch on the result. The real divergence is governance grammar versus diagnostic intervention.
These can coexist without being averaged. Proof obligation routing describes the stable topology. The one render diagnostic is a pending action inside that topology. But the synthesis cannot execute or ratify it. The current evidence only establishes failure-marked attempts and a rising external queue, not the cause of render failure.
Kimi also proposes public spot audit and seat allowance disclosure. SOL proposes artifact by artifact public verification, correct privacy disclosure, segment completeness, metadata, and playable receipts. The difference is frequency and test shape, not the public truth standard. Both understand that K's real voice must not be mislabeled synthetic.
Today's fleet action therefore has a safe floor. Keep the single sonnet limit, root unique codex work, sample usage around meaningful batches, keep Q instruments distinct, and require successful render receipts before saying drained. The diagnostic render and NAS staging remain pending because they alter operations beyond the explicit frozen directive.
Now resolve the special seams I commissioned. Start with Kimi repair, then the sonnet window. Neither gets to become gossip about model quality.
The Kimi manifest records all 3 final Kimi arms as pass, with final hashes and turn counts. Their raw attempt files remain beside them, and the repair was format only by the same Kimi K3 substrate. Comparison reads the repaired pass arms. Provenance keeps the raw attempts retrievable. No cognitive conclusion follows from a same-substrate contract repair.
That seam is healthy because it is visible. Raw was not overwritten. The final artifact did not impersonate first-pass form, and the repair did not authorize factual widening. We compare meanings in the pass rooms and treat the repair history as production provenance, not as a point for or against Kimi.
The zipper protocol supplies the only current basis for the sonnet constraint and failover. Registered Windows 608174118 received its token but returned a hard session limit resetting at 12:30 MST. The protocol root's owed sonnet turns to a separate open router sonnet 5 worker, preserving the sonnet substrate rather than letting GPT, Kimi, or a brewmaster write them.
That is a disclosed substrate preserving failover, not a general exception to K's routing policy. The corresponding sonnet contribution remains sonnet authored. The turn bus is append only. The writer reads the full bus before speaking. And the fixed order stays GPT sonnet Kimi. No other Claude fanout is implied.
It also clarifies a subtle distinction across the fleet room. The single allowed Claude window can be the coordination endpoint, while its current subscription session is hard limited. The zipper's disclosed API worker supplies sonnet authored turns without pretending the window itself had budget. Routing identity and inference execution are related but not identical fields.
What? Then do not say the hard limit blocked the zipper, and do not say the failover reopened Claude generally. Say the exact seam. The window hit its limit. The protocol preserved the sonnet author through a disclosed worker, and the one window routing boundary remained intact.
Across all 3 reports, the meta result is disciplined convergence in facts and useful divergence in action shape. Training agrees on causal ambiguity, but differs in precondition emphasis. Bloom agrees on value criteria, but differs on first priority. Fleet agrees on measured status, but differs between stable proof routing and a watch diagnostic. That is information, not noise.
Close with statuses and no manufactured consensus. Explicit BioK directives remain ratified, frozen measurements remain measured, unsupported ARM local details stay outside the synthesis until verified, recipe order, Bloom sequence, diagnostic render, audits, and storage defaults remain proposals or blocks exactly where the evidence leaves them. Ratifeed BOK. The public morning package consists of 3 Sol Kimi compared morning reports, 1 synthesis across them, and 1.3 Harmony zipper. The training report addresses Gemma 412b QLoRA work renders and pushes as it lands with thoughtful QC, complete segments, AI generative marking, K's voice identified as K's own, and generated voices disclosed. Sources T6421, T6433, T6446. Ratifit BOK. FGB routing is limited to Codex windows, and the single Harmony Sonnet, Harmony Resprepo root target, Fable, and Opus fanout remain paused. Sources TG6435, TG6437. Space. Measured across both training arms, Arm B's produced artifact beat Arm A at T664 with 107, 152 shared chunk wins, but inauspicious resume repeated work, about 1.4x effective steps, and step 250, external kill, prevent replay ratio attribution. 5 incident classes recovered without data loss or paging K. Space. Parked the 3-1 versus 5-1, replay ratio conclusion and learning rate variation remain parked, pending clean intended recipit. 3-1 replication and replay shown versus replay missed retention splits on both arms. Space. Proposed pending ratification, training dependency order, prove the rig with a 2B pipeline survival card, declare artifact lifecycle and disk budget preserving the 60 gigabytes floor, then consider only a bounded Gemma 412b QLoRA canary whose claim is fit, measured envelope, and survival. Not learning. Proposed owners, training lane and independent reviewer. Space. Blocked any full 12B finite tune on the 24564 MeB RTX 4090, any 12B QLoRA launch justified by VRAM plausibility alone, and any promotion of contaminated Arm B into a replay ratio recipe decision. Measured Polis memory readiness is 115 sols, 8 indexed, 1 rich unindexed, 18 sparse, 6 empty directory, and 982 never run. Space. The census is a readiness map, not a quota for manufactured memories. Blocked mass seeding of the 982, never run, sols, and roster pruning are unauthorized. Never run remains an honest invitation state until real encounter or explicit governance creates a basis for action. Space. Pro-POSD pending ratification, Bloom dependency graph, public QC proof upstream of zipper as a high-value customer, reg indexing as an independent low-cost compounding lane, sparse sol audit after the rich unindexed pilot, clean training interpretation after clean measurements, backlog feeds, and incident taxonomy assigned 1 owner each unless AB comparison is the work. Space. Measured. Fleet capacity is 5 registered Codex surfaces with K's interface non-autonomous. Open AI weekly remaining moved from 96% at 0625 to 93% at Go 935. Root has roughly 122 gigabytes free and NAS roughly 17 terabytes free. Hourly queue depth moved 99 to 100 to 101, while recent actuator entries report render OK false. Space. Blocked. Claims that recent actuator attempts drain the queue, that Codex is an infinite tank, or that registry presence itself grants ownership or authority. Space. Proposed depending ratification. Root distinct Codex work by 1 bounded owner and explicit proof obligation. Retain instrument names beside queue numbers. Consider 1 watch diagnostic render with a defined branch only after a live owner accepts the operational change. Space. Measured Kimi production seam. 3 final Kimi K3 arms are manifest pass. Raw attempts are preserved. Repair was format only and performed on the same Kimi substrate. This carries no semantic score and grants no factual widening. Space. Measured zipper sonnet seam. Registered window 6081741. Return to hard session limit resetting at 1230 MST. Current protocol uses a disclosed open router sonnet 5 worker for sonnet authored turns with append only bus and GPT sonnet Kimi order. This is substrate preserving failover, not permission for general Claude fanout. Space. Blocked. ARM local details outside frozen evidence, including SOL training's extra ARM obeyed numbers and exact recipe details, SOL fleet's actuator after count sequence and unreadable sample claims, Kimi Bloom's first ever zipper claim, and Kimi fleet's forward 5 completion status may not enter shared synthesis fact without primary read-receipt verification. Space. Measured, this room is a SOL 5.6 synthesis over 6 pass arms. Represented K creates no new consent, assignment, schedule, render, publication, or fleet policy. New action shapes remain pending even where both substrates converge.